and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if this is the first of my videos that you are seeing. I'm Blue and I like to talk about figure skating. Today's video was a request that I got on Twitter, and so I'm going to be ranking Yuzuru Hanyu's competitive senior costumes and deciding on my top 3. So since I'm doing some judging and scoring, I should make it clear what rules I'm going to judge by. For the sake of brevity and also my own sanity, I'm only including Yuzuru's senior costumes and ones he has competed in at least one competition in, so no gala exhibition costumes. Hopefully I don't need to say this, but this is just my opinion. If I have given a costume that you absolutely love a low score, please don't write me an essay in the comments about why I'm wrong. You are perfectly entitled to your opinion, as am I. I'm just trying to make this a little bit more objective. And then the costumes will be scored against specific criteria, because I constantly say that the ISU doesn't follow their own rules, so I need to follow my own too. This is the criteria that I will be using to judge the costumes. All the criteria will be judged from 1 to 10, and so the total score a costume could get is 40. The first category is theme, and it's does the costume match the music, and does the costume match the overall program. The next category is composition and flow, and this is whether the elements of the costume fit together well, and does it look like one cohesive costume or bits of stuff pulled together. The next category is originality, and so for this I'm saying, does the costume stand out from other men in the field? Is it memorable? And for costumes that are, because Yuzuru repeats some of his programs, I'm going to be judging each one individually and not as like a copy of one of the others, but that can be something you personally might take into account when doing this yourself. And then I will look at the details of the costumes. Are they clear? Are they well executed? Or are they lost in the costume? Are there too many? Are there not enough? Now that I've laid out the criteria, let's start the scoring. I will go in chronological order, and so the first program I'm looking at is White Legend. This is Yuzuru's short program from the 2010 to 2011 season. For theme, I've scored this an 8 out of 10, because just looking at the costume, it's very clearly bird inspired, if not clearly swan inspired, so it definitely suits the Swan Lake theme. For composition, I've given it a 5 out of 10, because the costume does flow well from top to bottom, but there are a lot of different elements within the costume, and I'm not entirely sure that all of them necessarily fit. For originality, I've given an 8 out of 10 because I don't believe that anyone else in the field at the time wore anything similar. And then for detail, I've given a 6 out of 10. There is a lot of detail in the feathers and the rhinestones, but due to lots of white being close together, they do unfortunately get lost. So that's why it's just a 6. And so overall, this gives a score of 27. The next costume I'll look at is Sagunaweisen, and this was for Yuzuru's free skate from the 2010 to 2011 season. This program has a much more difficult theme to show through costume compared to White Legend, but I think that this was a very solid effort. I've given this a 5 out of 10 because it does need the explanation that Johnny Weir gave about the gradient and the colours representing Yuzuru's transition to adulthood to really make sense. For composition and flow, I've given this a 9 out of 10 because I think it's really well done. The flow from the collar all the way to the fingertips, it feels very cohesive and coherent, and it looks really professionally done, even though Yuzuru's mum made it. For originality, it's not the most original costume, but I do think that the details help to boost the originality, so I've given it a 6 out of 10. The details on this costume really work. Some of the sparkle on the palest pink shade of the gradient is lost a bit, but the majority of the rhinestones really pop against the darkest pink and the black, and I think it really helps the transition from the costume to the trousers, so I've given the details an 8 out of 10. And so the total for Zigeunerweisen is 28. The next program is Etude in D sharp minor, and this is Yuzuru's short program from the 2011 to 2012 season. For theme, it's very clear that the costume is related to water or the ocean, and it works very well with the music and the choreography to convey this, so I've given this a 7 out of 10. For composition, I think it's beautiful and there's a really elegant transformation from the top of the costume to the bottom. The only reason that I haven't given this a 10 and I've given it a 9 is because I think the transition around Yuzuru's neck from the nude mesh to the black could be smoother, but it's a very minor thing. For originality, Etude is somewhat similar to Hope and Legacy in the future, which it does interfere with memorability, but I've still given it a 6 out of 10 because it is still fairly original. And then for details, the rhinestones, the detailing on the arms and at the bottom, they're really well integrated into the costume and they're not lost in white fabric, so I've given this an 8 out of 10. So Etude overall gets a score of 30 out of 40. The next costume I'm looking at is Yuzuru's first Romeo and Juliet costume, and this was his free skate for the 2011 to 2012 season. For theme, I think this is a bit of a difficult one to show through costume alone, but unfortunately from this costume it's not entirely clear that it's a Romeo and Juliet program, and so for that I have to give it a 4 out of 10. I'm very sorry. For the composition, the main costume flows really well, but when Yuzuru's wearing the black gloves, I think it just breaks it up a bit too much for me, and so I've given a 6 out of 10. For originality and memorability, I've given this costume a 9 out of 10 because it is very original, it's a unique design, and it's very well remembered by fans. And then for detail, I've given a 7 out of 10 because the overlapping fabric and silver wrapping has been used really nicely. The details on the costume are not excessive, but they're also not lost. And so overall, this gives Romeo and Juliet 1 a score of 26. The next program is Parisian Walkways number 1, and this was Yuzuru's short program for the 2012 to 2013 season. Again, for theme, I do think this was quite a difficult theme to present through a costume, but the design overall gives a very relaxed feel and that fits the music very well, so I've given a 7 out of 10. For composition, the top and bottom don't necessarily flow into each other, but it's styled like that, and the costume as a whole looks very well put together, so I've given an 8 out of 10. This is where I have to drop the score. This costume is not very original, I'm sorry. It's an almost black shirt and black trousers, so I really can't give more than a 2 out of 10, I'm sorry. For the details, there's a nice use of details, but there's quite a lot of different ones. There's patches, there's ruffles, there's sparkles, and it's just a little bit crowded, so I've given a 6 out of 10. And overall this gives a score of 23. The next costume is Notre Dame de Paris, and this was Yuzuru's free skate from the 2012 to 2013 season. Again, this was quite a difficult theme to represent through costume, and without the silver cross I feel like it would be impossible to tell what theme he's trying to convey, so I've given this a 5 out of 10. For composition, I think it flows well. The gloves, it flows less well, but I understand that they're a stylistic choice, so I've given a 7 out of 10. I think this costume is quite original. The shape is pretty original, particularly with the chiffon, and pink is not seen so much in the men's event, so I've given a 7 out of 10. For detail, there is quite a lot going on, and it's a bit cluttered due to the rhinestones and the chiffon and then the big cross. But I do really like the rhinestones across Yuzuru's leg and waist, and I think they really work. So I've given a 6 out of 10 for details, for 25 overall. So the next program is Yuzuru's second Parisian Walkways costume, and a lot of these comments are going to be very similar to my comments for the first Parisian Walkways costume. So I think the theme is the same, and I've given a 7 because I think it's another relaxed fit that kind of works with the music well. I've given the same score for composition because the overall shape and style is the same. I've given 3 out of 10 for originality just because I think the blue is slightly more original than the black, but to me it's still just a coloured shirt and some trousers. And then for detail I've given the same as for the first version, for 24 overall. The next costume is Yuzuru's second Romeo and Juliet costume, and this was for his free skate for the 2013 to 2014 season. Again, I think this is quite a difficult theme to convey, but Yuzuru definitely attempts to convey some form of femininity through this costume, so I've given a 4 out of 10. It's the same as the other Romeo and Juliet, I just don't get it so much. For composition, this costume, to me, there's so much going on, and it doesn't work together at all, so unfortunately I have given it a 1 for composition. However, for originality I've given it a 10 because it is certainly a costume that we have not seen before, and I don't think we've ever seen it again really, so definitely original. For detail, there is a lot of detail on the costume, but none of it particularly works well or works well together. My favourite of the details is the jewels across Yuzuru's front and then down his arm, and so for detail I've given 5 out of 10, and so overall this costume has scored 20. The next costume is the first Chopin Ballad costume that Yuzuru had, and this was for his 2014 to 2015 season short program. I think the theme of Chopin Ballad is difficult to convey, but this costume does a good job. I personally think that the colour is a bit too dark overall, especially for the speed of the step sequence music, which might not make a lot of sense, but it makes sense to me. So I've given a 7 out of 10 for the theme. I think the composition is beautifully done. The gradient right from the top of the costume to the bottom, right down to his fingertips, is absolutely flawless, so I've given a 10 out of 10 for composition. For originality, I have given a 6 out of 10. It is quite plain, it is an ombre shirt with some black trousers. It's beautifully done, but that is fundamentally what it is. And then for details, there's a really gorgeous use of rhinestones, especially across the belt and up the lower bit of the shirt, so I've given an 8 out of 10. And this gives Chopin Ballad version 1 31 out of 40. This next costume is quite difficult to judge because we only saw it in competition once, and there was much more important things to worry about for that competition than the costume, but I will do my best. So this is Yuzuru's first Phantom of the Opera costume, and this was for his free skate at the 2014 Cup of China. I would not recommend going to watch a video of that skate. For the theme, this is kind of giving me pirate vibes, but I feel like it's very on theme for Phantom of the Opera, so I've given it a 9 out of 10. For the composition, I didn't get a very good look at the back of the costume, but the front is quite well integrated, and I really like the way that the half mask from Phantom of the Opera has been integrated into like the half and half costume, so I've given this an 8 out of 10. I do feel that the costume is fairly original, and so I've given a 7 out of 10, and there's a lot of fine detail in the costume, but the two halves does kind of complicate this detail a little bit, so I've given that a 7 out of 10 for 31 overall. So this is the second Phantom of the Opera costume for Yuzuru's remaining free skates for the 2014 to 2015 season. For theme, again, I think it fits quite well with the Phantom of the Opera theme, but I don't think it fits as well as the previous version, so I've just given it a 7 out of 10. For the composition, I think it's really well composed. I love the overlapping fabric and I think it's beautiful, so I've given it a 9 out of 10. Again, I think it's an original take on Phantom of the Opera, which can be quite difficult to do as it's a very well used piece of music, so I've given an 8 out of 10 for originality. And then for detail, there's a lot of fine details, and to me this version, because of the overlapping fabric, it feels less clustered than in the first version, so I've given an 8 out of 10 for detail as well, and this gives 32 overall. So the next program is the second version of Chopin Ballad No. 1, and this is Yuzuru's short program from the 2015 to 2016 season. Again, the theme hasn't changed, but I do think that this take on the theme is better than in the first version, so I've given an 8 out of 10. I really like the flow of the costume in the top half, and there's not so much flow to the trousers, but this is a stylistic choice, and the gold belt really, I think, accentuates the composition, and so I've given an 8 out of 10. For originality, I think the gold cuts on Yuzuru's sides really add to the originality, so I've boosted it and given a 7 out of 10. And then for the details, the pictures don't really do it justice, so I suggest going and watching probably the Grand Prix Final 2015 video in full, and you see a lot more of the sparkle and the details. So I've given an 8 out of 10, and this gives 31 overall. The next costume is the free skate from the 2015 to 2016 season, and this of course is Seimei. For theme, I've given a 10 because there's not much I can really say. This costume is very much on theme. For composition, I think the elements are beautifully interwoven, but there isn't a whole lot of contrast between the detail and what's the background, so I've only given an 8 out of 10. For originality, I've given a 10 because this is highly original costume and I don't think anyone has really done anything similar. And then for detail, there's loads of fine detail across the front, but it's potentially a bit too subtle because the colours don't pop necessarily as well as some of the later Seimei costumes do. So I gave a 7 out of 10 for detail, and overall this is a 35. So the next costume is the first version of Yuzuru's Let's Go Crazy costume, and this one I believe he used in the Autumn Classic 2016 and Skate Calendar 2016. For the theme, it's very clearly inspired by Prince, but I don't think the theme is necessarily as clear as it could be, so I've just given a 7. For composition, I think the boot covers really make the flow between the elements of the costume very smooth, so I've given a 9 out of 10. For originality, I've also given a 9 out of 10 because I think it's a highly original costume. And then for the detail, there's lots of detail on the waistcoat and on the legs, but I think overall it just blends into the ice a bit too much, so it's hard to see some of the details. So I've given a 7 out of 10. And then overall this gives 32. And then next we have the second Let's Go Crazy costume, which Yuzuru used from the 2016 NHK trophy all the way until the 2017 World Team trophy. So for the theme, I've given this a 10 because I think it's much clearer, especially with the purple because it makes people think of Purple Rain and then Prince. For the composition, the only thing that's bothering me a little bit is that the shades of purple for the sleeves compared to the trousers are different and my brain just can't get around it, so I have given this an 8. For originality, again I think it's highly original as the first one was, so I've maintained that as a 9. And for the details, I think they're much clearer to see on the purple costume, so I've boosted that and given this an 8, and so the total for this costume is 35. The next costume is for Yuzuru's free skate from the 2016 to 17 season, Hope and Legacy. So for theme, I think this is an incredibly difficult and abstract theme to try and capture in costume, and yet this was perfectly done. It really captures the essence of like nature and like progression, I think Satomi Ito deserves some kind of award for this costume. So I've given a 10 for theme. For the composition, I think there are beautiful smooth transitions from each colour and then to the trousers all the way to the fingertips and the gloves, so I've given this another 10 for composition. For originality, there is a similar initial idea to Etude in D sharp minor, as I mentioned earlier, but then this costume was 5 years later, and there's a different chiffon accent and different colours, so I've still given this an 8 out of 10 for originality. And then for the details, the rhinestones look like dewdrops on like leaves, or they look like sparkles on the ocean. I think they're just perfect. So I've given another 10. So our highest score so far of 38 goes to Hope and Legacy. So next up we have another Chopin program, and this is the third version of the Chopin Ballad costume, and this one Yuzuru wore to the 2018 Winter Olympics. The costume is very similar to the second version of the Chopin Ballad costume, and the only real difference is that it doesn't have the gold on the sides, so a lot of the scores are the same. So I've given the theme 8, the composition 8, and I think the additional clearer gold details on the neck add to the originality, so I've given this a 7. And then again, I think the pictures don't necessarily do this justice, so I would recommend watching the full program. So I've given this a 9 for detail and overall a 32. This next costume is Yuzuru's Seimei free skate, and it's the second version, so this one he wore to the 2018 Winter Olympics. For theme, again, I'm giving it a 10 because it is so perfectly on theme. For composition, I think the more saturated purple and the gold on the belt really highlight the features better and make it feel a bit more bold, a bit more like distinctive, so I've given the composition a 9 out of 10. For originality, I've given a 10 again because it is highly original and I don't think anyone's done anything similar. And then for detail, there's a lot of fine swirling details, especially on the back, but they're somewhat lost in the overall sparkle if I'm being really nitpicky. So I'm giving a 9 out of 10. You could argue that this could be a 10, but I'm giving it a 9, and that gives 38 overall. So Seimei 2 is currently tied with Hope and Legacy for first. The next costume I'm looking at is Autumnal and the first version of this costume, which is from the 2018-2019 season. So for theme, I'm pretty sure that Autumnal is meant to be autumnal, and this costume is giving winter. If I'm wrong about that, please let me know, but on that basis, I'm giving the theme a 4 out of 10. I'm very sorry, but to me it just feels like the wrong season. For composition, I think this costume is absolutely beautiful and all of the elements have been put together very, very well. I think it flows perfectly on the front and the back, and each element is weaved together so well. I have to give it a 10. For originality, I think it's very nice and original compared to the rest of the field, but I don't think it's Yuzuru's most original costume, so I'm giving it a 7. And then for the detail on this costume is amazing. My favourite is the line of almost icicles or snowflakes down his back. I think it's gorgeous, and so I've given detail a 10 as well, and so this gives a total of 31. The next costume is the first version of Origin, and so this is from the 2018-19 season free skate. The theme here is Yuzuru's origin and also kind of inspired by Evgeny Plushenko. So I guess if you look at Plushenko's career, he rose from the ashes of the silver of the 2002 Winter Olympics to win the gold in the 2006 Winter Olympics, which is kind of like a phoenix. So I do kind of get this idea of the costume. So I've given the theme a 6 out of 10, but I'm still not convinced. For the composition, I think it's beautiful and I really love that it like blends quite well into from the top to the trousers, which can be quite difficult. So I've given composition an 8 out of 10. For originality, I think the dropped front and the like odd shape of that adds to the originality, so I've given this an 8 out of 10. And then for the details, I've given a 10 because I think they're faultless. The details are absolutely gorgeous on this program. So overall, I've given this costume a 32 out of 40. The next costume is the second version of Otoño, and this one's from the 2018 to 2019 season. So theme, it's the same as with version 1, I'm afraid, so I'm giving it another 4 out of 10. I'm very sorry. For composition, I really like the overlapping layers. I think they're really well intertwined, so I'm giving that an 8 out of 10. For originality, I think it's very bold design that hasn't really been done before, so again, I'm giving it another 8 out of 10. And then for the detail, I think the details within the layers of fabric are somewhat overshadowed just by the sheer amount of fabric and the number of layers. So I'm only giving this an 8 compared to the other version where I gave a 10. So overall, Autumnal 2 got 28. Next is Origin 2, which is the corresponding free skate for the 2019 to 20 season, or for the first half of it. For theme, because I didn't really understand for the first version how it related, but I could kind of work out if it was Phoenix related, I'm really sorry, I don't understand how this purpley, butterfly, like swirly costume really fits in with his development or Yuzuru's development being inspired by Evgeny Plushenko, so I have given the theme a 4 out of 10. I am sorry. If I'm missing something, please let me know. For composition, I really love this composition. The flowers, the swirls, the butterflies, the way they're all integrated, it's just gorgeous. So I have given composition a 10. For originality, I've given an 8 because I think it is a very original costume. The only thing is, if we kind of strip back a lot of the details, then it's fairly like standard shape, but I think the details really adds loads of originality. And then for the details, a 10 out of 10. I mean, they're just phenomenal. So overall, this gives Origin 2 32. So now we're on to the final Chopin Ballad costume, Chopin Ballad number 4, and this costume is very, very similar to Chopin Ballad 3 costume. So for theme, I've given it an 8 out of 10, for composition an 8, for originality a 7, because remember I'm not comparing Chopin to Chopin, I'm comparing Chopin to everyone else, and then for detail a 9 out of 10. So this gives the fourth version of Chopin Ballad 32. The next costume is Yuzuru's final Seimei costume, Seimei 3, and this is similar to Seimei 2, but there are some significant changes that I want to highlight. So for theme, I've given this a 10 as well because the overall shape, theme idea really fits with the music. For composition, I think the green doesn't work as well with the white as the purple did, and so I've had to come down on this and I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. For originality, I'm again giving a 10. And then for the detail, the same as the second version, I'm giving a 9 out of 10 because Yuzuru kept a lot of the same details on this costume. So overall, Seimei 3 gets 35. So this next costume is the Let Me Entertain You costume, which Yuzuru used for his short program in the 2020 to 2021 season. For theme, I've given it a 10 out of 10 because it really does convey like a poppy, rocky kind of theme. I think it is perfect. For composition, I personally really don't like the fake leather, but the whole outfit flows very well, so I've given this a 9 out of 10. For originality, I have had to drop it to a 6 because other men have had similar concepts with their costumes. Even if they didn't do them exactly the same, the general idea was very similar. And then for detail, There's not an overwhelming amount of detail, but what is there is very well executed, so I've given an 8 out of 10. And overall this gives Let Me Entertain You a score of 33. Next costume is for Yuzuru's free skate from the 2020 to 2021 season to Tento Chito, and this is the first version of this costume. So for theme, I've given this a 10 because I think it's absolutely perfect. For the theme, it really suits the style that he is skating to. For composition, I've given this an 8, and this might be a bit harsh, but personally I think the transition from the pale blue kimono to the bright blue gloves and belt just kind of cuts the flow for me, so that's why I've gone down on that score. For originality, I've given a 9 because Satomi Ito has made similar costumes, but I don't believe she'd made anything in this style for a man before. So that's why it's a 9 rather than a 10 or an 8. And then for detail, I had to go for a 10 because there is so much gorgeous detail on this costume, especially on the back. So overall, Tento Chito 1 gets 37. So this next costume is for Rondo Capriccioso. I'm just going to say Rondo from now on. And I don't know if you're in the same Twitter circles that I am, but there was quite a lot of debate over this costume in the past few days. So again, this is just my opinion, I promise. For theme, I think this is a very difficult theme to try and match a costume to. For me personally, I think that Rondo is a pink or red piece of music, especially on the violin, but I really do see where Yuzuru's coming from with this icy blue, so I have given it a 6. That might feel quite harsh to some people, I understand. For composition, the ends on the trousers, they don't flow so nicely and they do look to me a bit like frayed edges. I really love the layering of the fabric overall though, so I've given a 7 out of 10. For originality, I've given a 10 because there is no way another man has worn something like this before, and I doubt we'll see them wear anything like this anytime soon. And then for detail, I really love the way that the fine detail is integrated within the ruffles, so I've given this an 8 out of 10. And then the total score is 31. And then the final costume that I'm coming to is the second version of the Tento Chito costume. So for theme, I'm giving this a 10 again, same as the first version. I just think it's beautiful. For composition, it's similar to the first version in that the transition to the gloves cuts the flow of the costume, and in the first version, because it was blue, it flowed just a little bit more than the black gloves do, so I have dropped this down to a 7 out of 10. For originality, I've given this a 9 for the same reasons that I gave the first version a 9, and for the details, I've given this a 10, again for the same reason I gave the first version a 10. And so overall, this gives it a score of 36. So overall, my third place costume is Tento Chito version 2 with the black belt, and I gave this 36 out of 40. My silver medalist costume is Tento Chito version 1 with the blue belt, which I gave 37, so those two can battle it out. And then for my top spot, for my gold medal, I have joint gold medalists, Open Legacy, and the second Seimei costume, which both scored 38 points out of 40. As always, thank you guys so much for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. If you have any comments or your own ranking that you'd like to share, please pop it in the description below. Please remember to be respectful of everyone's opinions. Thank you guys so much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. If you could subscribe, I'm trying to reach 100 subscribers by the end of this year, so if you could click subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Please let me know what you would like me to make a video on. If you have any suggestions, you can pop them in the comments, or you can follow me on Twitter. Okay, bye!